said that visitations of bad luck are habitually thrice-fold. It strikes once, be sure it will chime in again, twice over. This was a law that overshadowed one fateful year in the late 1700s, when it came calling upon a coastal hamlet known as Blackpool. The place was a rural community, comprising 200 cottages, built with clay from the cliffs, and cobbles from the beach, and isolated from the rest of the world by an encircle of thick forests, or, as some termed it, idiots with wolves. The inhabitants were mainly fishermen and agricultural labourers, scratching an existence from their small holdings. These were supplemented by a tiny number of hotels and inns, offering accommodation to those who came unnamed. There was no school, no library, nor even a church in which they could pray for deliverance from the terrible events that were about to plague them. The opening chapter of this tragedy was the spectre of the blighting summer which cursed fields and potato crop, caused them to fail completely. The prospect of a sustenance absent of Prata was appalling enough, but then the cornfields yielded such a meagre harvest there was hardly a hatten's worth that could be reaped. Prices soon went up, and food could only be sourced from ventures inland, the cost of which was beyond the means of their many. With the onset of winter, even fish and cockles would be scarce, and dark months of starvation faced all concerned. Then came the dawn of the third disaster. A ferocious storm suddenly blew up like a waving banshee, and only a blessed few would be spared its wrath. Cottages were robbed of their thatches, the wind tearing them apart. Then the sea swept inland, drawn by the reaper's scythe, and flooded its victims out of what remained of their homes. Many folk feared the merciless water would swallow them completely, as it had with the forts that stood centuries earlier. Instinctively, those washed out by the deluge headed for the Foxhall Hotel, where Samuel Clifton, the community's unofficial leader, was busily organising shelter and food. As evening approached, the crowd were huddled in the hotel sitting rooms, wrapped in blankets and consoling themselves with bowls of hot broth while listening to the wind outside. There was hardly the sound of conversation, as there was little to say. Just a quiet resignation that theirs was the look of Job. And could things get any worse? The unspoken question was soon answered, when one of the local cockles came running in with a look of panic on his face. He wasted no time in grabbing Clifton's attention. "Sam, quick! It's the sea calling!" Samuel Clifton took hold of the man to calm him down, demanding, "What's the trouble?" The man explained, "There's a ship caught out of the Surrey. Looks in bad shape, ain't steering itself, that be for sure." Without hesitation, Clifton put round an appeal for any able-bodied men to accompany him to the scene of the drama, a plea to which few were backward and stepping forward. Leaving the foxhole, the crowd gathered around the shoreline, where a couple of men already were waiting with rope and grappling hooks. Through the spray, they could see the vessel being tossed in the angry crest of waves. Its sails were in ribbons, its rudder gone, and each wave brought it nearer. They could see its men desperately clinging to the broken bulwarks and mast, some with eyes tightly closed and evidently deep in calling on the Almighty for salvation. Clifton turned back to the crowd, his voice trying to compete with the wailing wind. "She's still too far to reach." "Aye, and tide won't tire," one of the others confirmed. Clifton glanced back at the vessel before adding, "Well, pray she don't come apart before hitting shoreside." And then, that prayer was unexpectedly answered, albeit in somewhat pyrrhic fashion. A great wave suddenly roared into view and lifted the ship high, its panic-stricken crew now really clinging for dear life. Then he brought the vessel down, bearing it onto the beach with a deafening crash. Its men wasted no time in evacuating the wreck, the villagers rushing forward and helping them onto the safety of the sand. As the last mariner got ashore, there was a monstrous creaking as the vessel began to break and tear, its splintered parts swallowed back into the snare of the sea. Both crew and villagers could do nothing but silently watch the wild water claim its prey. The survivors were escorted back to the foxhole to join other dispossessed locals for a night's food and shelter. As twilight cast its shadow over the Fylde coast, the weather also calmed down, and the landscape went strangely quiet. Sam Clifton had strolled back to the shore to watch the sun setting, accompanied by the sound of the tide now gently brushing the sandy beach. He did not stand alone for long, as the captain of the doomed ship joined him and similarly contemplated the now tranquil sea. "Calm after the storms," Clifton commented. "We see a lot of it round here. I guess you hadn't witnessed it more." "Aye," the captain replied. "Sea be both friends and nemesis. Hers is a treacherous love." Clifton turned his head and looked at the man with pity, adding, "Sorry about your boat." The captain shook his head, reasoning, "At least we have our lives. To be thankful to the good Lord for that." His eyes then sank as he continued, "And to your people. I understand times are desperate around here, which makes your hospitality all the more generous." The captain paused in thought for a few seconds before speaking further. "Wish I had a way of repaying you all, and be sure my men would too if they could. For I reckon the sea will reap you in a reward." Clifton looked at him quizzically, asking, "How?" The captain looked back at the ocean. "First line, my crew and I will set off for Liverpool and report in. I'll log the loss of both ship and cargo with nothing to salvage." He looked back at Clifton, adding, "Wherever washes up here belongs to your folk. Every Samaritan deserves favour." The following morning, the captain and his crew bowed a fond farewell to their hosts and set off by foot to Preston, hoping to pick up transport from there. The locals began returning to their homes and cleaned up the storm damage. Many wondered if it was even worth bothering, given they would soon run out of food. But then, as the early evening tide turned, came a ray of salvation. For the second time, Samuel Clifton found himself summoned to the shore, where a now exciting crowd had gathered. For along the beach was strewn the doomed ship's cargo that had been promised the night before. Sacks and sacks containing an abundance of peas. The new harvest was quickly reaped, and the sacks billeted into the largest barn available, ready for distribution the next day. One of the men who assisted in this task stood contemplating the stock while scratching the back of his head, before turning to Clifton and commenting, "It's certainly a godsend, and better than now. I won't preach against that. For our folks to live on peas." Samuel Clifton replied with a shrug of his shoulders, adding, "Well, let's hope our wives are fanciful with their recipes, because peas is the only bill of fare we're going to be having for the time being." Indeed, for the 2 months that followed, the population of Blackpool lived on the shipwrecked fleas. Sometimes boiled in their own swans, sometimes roasted and sprinkled with alacart. More often the main feature was stew, whatever else could be scraped together, but usually was a hot, nourishing soup. In fact, those long months went down in history as the Great Pea Soup, and it was with equal great relief when affordable supplies of other produce began to arrive. Other greens, wheat, meat, anything but peas. One of the local fishermen later lent his memories to a scribe who was recording the event of prosperity, lamenting, "Oh, I recollect it well. We were fair starved at peas. We couldn't stomach it for years after in Blackpool. It were nice of Providence to send us pea wreck, but I think it'd be no worse if just sent us a bacon wreck as we."